Okay, well, we are going now to plunge in at the deep end with possibly the most important variation of the Austrian attack, which is actually reached in our current game via a modern defence move order, but will quickly transpose to the Pirc after knight f6. And the most critical line starts with knight f3 and then bishop d3. I think this is one of White's most dangerous tries because of its simplicity in many ways. White protects the pawn on e4, he prepares to castle, and then he's going to follow up with moves like queen e1 and then queen h4. And of course there are also ideas of e5 and f5 in the air, so White has all these options on the table. I think the reason White prefers this in general over bishop e3 is that he doesn't know yet where he wants that bishop on c1. So Black has to be very accurate against bishop d3. And I'm going to recommend the move knight a6 as one of Black's best replies. This is a modern move. It's come into prominence over the past 20-30 years, and many strong players are using it as their main line. It's a logical move because it introduces ideas of knight b4 into the equation, and then Black will certainly take off the bishop on d3 if he's allowed to do so. So my first game comes from the very recent European Championship played in Aix-les-Bains in March 2011 between female Grandmaster Anna Muzychuk, who's grades 2528, and Ivan Cheparinov, world-class Grandmaster, graded 2664. And in this game, Muzychuk just simply castles. That is the mainline move. And now Black plays a typical jab at the White centre, c5. I think bishop takes a6 by White in this position isn't really dangerous at any stage. White would cede the bishop pair and lose time. Added to which, you're giving up a valuable centrally placed bishop for an offside knight. So that really doesn't worry Black in any way. Therefore, c5, as I said, hits at the White centre and forces White to make a decision. And the first move I'm going to look at here is d5. I mean, that is one of White's most common options in this position. White gains space in the centre and invites Black to try and find counterplay against this broad centre. And one way to do this is to play rook to b8, as Cheparinov does. So the position takes on the characteristic of the Benoni. With rook b8, Black is thinking about preparing the move b5, and he can often put the knight on a6 back on c7 in order to help him do this, as we're going to see a little bit later down the line. And in this game, Muzychuk plays her king into h1, a typical safety first measure by which White tucks her king away first before embarking on anything active. Well, Black plays bishop g4. Again, that is the main move. If we think about White's advance in the centre e5, the move bishop g4 makes a lot of sense. Black is thinking about taking on f3, making the advance e5 less attractive. You often find in King's Indian and Benoni positions that the bishop on c8 can become a problem piece. So exchanging it off at an early stage makes a lot of sense. And now Muzychuk played bishop out to e3. Well, at this stage there are options. Obviously, White can put the question to Black's bishop immediately by playing h3. And then I think Black should certainly take on f3. If White takes back with the queen, then I think knight b4 is a good move. Going back to bishop takes f3. If White takes back with the rook, then I think Black should fashion his counterplay slightly differently by playing the knight back to c7. This is a very common idea, and if White tries to prevent Black from playing b5 by playing a4 himself, then Black should go a6. There was an old game of Spielman's which continued a5 and now knight b5. This is an ingenious move, taking note of the fact that if White takes back on b5 twice, Black can take on e4. So bishop d2, rook c8 happened in this Spielman game, b3 knight d4, rook f2 and now e6, when Black is getting good counterplay. Just dropping back to the position after bishop g4. White can obviously unpin here with the thematic move queen e1. After this, I think Black should be in quite a hurry to take this bishop off the board, so knight b4. Queen comes up to h4, and now John Nunn recommends the move queen to c8 in this position. This protects the bishop and takes a lot of the sting out of white's move e5. If a3, black gets good counterplay by taking the bishop and then going b5, making sense of his rook on b8. And if e5 in this position, we have bishop takes f3, rook takes f3, and now the tactical move b4. You've always got to watch out for opportunities of this type in this line. And the point of b4 is that if he takes f6, black is going to recapture with the bishop, when white has the queen and the knight on pre. This represents a very typical line in this particular variation. So returning to the game Muzychuk versus Cheparinov now, white decided to play the straightforward move bishop e3, and black dropped his knight away to d7, again taking the sting out of the move e5. White played a3, and now with nothing to do on a6, the knight went back to c7. White played a4, black played a6, a5, and now black goes through with b5. Cheparinov understands that this is a double-edged move. Yes, he's got a weakness on a6, but he gets good counterplay on the b file as a result. Muzychuk doesn't like the counterplay against b2, so she gives the rook a nudge and then pushes her pawn up to c4, after which black attacks the centre a second time with e6. Again, we're transposing to what looks like to me a variation of the King's Indian 4 pawns attack, and one which is satisfactory for black, as Cheparinov correctly continues to try and demolish white's centre, and then he puts his rook in on b3. The point of this move is to nudge the bishop off his central post, and when the bishop drops back to c2, black drops his own rook back to b8. As long as black has the moves e5 and f5 under control here, he should be absolutely fine. More than that, as Cheparinov now starts to manoeuvre his knight into active play, and seeing that knight coming into d4, Muzychuk decides to take action. Black takes, and now white reveals the point of her last move. She takes on c5. But black is absolutely fine here, as he comes into d4 with at least equal play. White snaps off that knight, and snaps off the pawn on a6, and black's rook comes down to take on b2. I slightly prefer black in this position. White's pieces are more disjointed. The pawn on d4 looks stronger to me than the pawn on d5, and black's king is slightly safer. Bishop a4 was answered by knight b6, and bishop c6 was answered by knight c4. And now the square e3 looks like a very strong position to occupy for that knight. I'm not even sure white can prevent it. So knight came to c5. Black did indeed put his knight in on e3, and rook b1 was answered by rook takes g2. Rook fe1 was answered by queen a5, and rook takes e3 was answered by d takes e3. So black is keeping his big advantage alive through tactical complications. Well, the combination has burned out. Black is still a pawn up. Moreover, the bishop on g7 is much stronger than the bishop on c6, which looks rather lame. White's main problem, of course, is his open king. And as the game continues, Muzychuk finds his position impossible to hold. Bishop came into c3, and either white lost on time in this position, or she simply resigned. I think black is winning fairly comfortably. Yes, the queens can come off, but after that, white will be fairly paralysed, and black's winning plan might be just to march the king up, king g7, king f6, king f5, put the rook on d8 to hold the d-pawn. This should be a nice easy win. Well, in that game, white didn't really make anything of her opening central advantage. She never really found an effective way to push the central pawns, and black not only held the position, but managed to develop excellent counterplay as the game wore on.